Hello, my name is Kaze and welcome to another Kaze Labs video. So what did the cat drag in today? Well, it's a Korg DSS-1. What is a Korg DSS-1, you might ask? Well, it's a sampler from the mid-80s that Korg made right around the same time that they were releasing like the DW8000, I think. Now, this guy happens to be, in my opinion, one of the best kept secrets from that era, in the sense that not only is it a sampler that allows you to record your own sounds and then kind of map them across the keyboard, but it also has an additive synth engine built in that you can kind of like use to create your own waveforms. And even better, you can actually use the slider bar right here, and there's like a cursor that comes along here, and you can actually draw your own waveforms, believe it or not, and use those as a basis. Now, in addition to that, it's got like a really awesome analog filtering section. This thing sounds incredibly fat. I think it puts the DW8000 to shame. If you find one, I highly encourage you to take a closer look and see if this might be something that you could use for your music. Having said that, it's heavy as hell. It's really big. It's really unwieldy. And the guy that sold it to me said that it actually works. And I don't know if you can see it in the video, but this is actually on, which is more than I can say for the majority of synthesizers that I've brought here into the lab. On that note, word of warning, like always, is that we're dealing with live electricity. We're dealing with very delicate electronic components. So if you have one of those guys and you're following along trying to repair yours, be very careful. And if you don't feel comfortable working around this type of circuitry, then please seek the help of a professional synth repair shop that hopefully can bring this guy back to life without damaging anything, or most importantly, without damaging yourself. Having said that, I think we're ready to take a closer look at the Korg DSS-1 and see if we can figure out what's going on. Alright, so here we have the Korg DSS-1. As I said in the intro, it actually is working. It powers on, the display comes on, the buttons are working, and I do have like some sounds that I was able to load in here, and indeed everything plays back the way it's supposed to. So this is fantastic because it's such a better starting point when things are at least basically working than if you're working on a synthesizer that won't even power on. So having said that, there are like three things that I would like to do to this Korg DSS-1. The first thing I want to do is change the floppy drive. This is like a standard floppy drive that uses, you know, just kind of like discs from the 80s. And it works just fine, but it's not a particularly practical device. I have like a lot of libraries, disk images for the Korg DSS-1, and they're all stored digitally on a thumb drive. So having an actual floppy drive in here is not the most practical thing for me. So I'd like to replace it, and what I'm going to replace it with is this guy right here. This is made by a company called GoTech, and for all intents and purposes, what this is a floppy drive emulator that uses little thumb drives for storage, and then with this knob you can select whatever disk image that you want to load up into the Korg DSS-1. And then as far as the Korg DSS-1, it's as if you would have inserted a floppy disk in here. And it's got all the same connectors on the back, so it should be pretty easy to just kind of unplug this guy, unscrew it out of the unit, and then put this guy right in. Number two, what I like to do is change the display. The display is working. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it, but it's a little dim. I don't know, like, I mean, it's not like the easiest thing to read. So what I did is I went ahead and purchased another display, and this is the same size as what's in here, but the backlight is a lot brighter and it should make it a lot easier to read. Now, there are a couple of things that I need to do because the replacement display is utilizing a little bit more voltage than this guy because it's brighter, obviously. So I just need to like make some tweaks on the inside circuit that's driving this display and like change a couple of things. So I'll show you how to do that. And the third thing that I want to do is as I was loading up the sounds and kind of playing on the keyboard, I noticed a couple of keys were a little bit iffy, particularly this A4 on the keyboard is not working at all. I suspect it's probably just a dirty contact, so I just need to get in there with a little bit of sandpaper and contact cleaner to get it working again. And while I'm at it, I'm probably just gonna like thoroughly clean all the keys and maybe even polish them, because I do think that it makes a nice difference in the way the keys feel. I'm gonna start with the easiest thing, which is the floppy drive. Opening up the Korg DSS-1 is a lot easier than the DW keyboards that have like a million screws on the underside. I mean, there are basically 3 screws here on this side, 3 on this side, and most importantly, there's one back here. I don't know if you can see, and there's another one on the back side here. So you have to like get rid of those 2 smaller screws in there before the top flips open like this. It is hinged, which is nice, so that you don't have to worry about this thing kind of flying open and ripping out some cables while it's at it. The inside looks pretty clean, and I'm very happy with what I'm seeing. When we go and replace the LCD display, we're going to be dealing with this guy right here and this little board, where, as I said, we have to make some small modifications. And the keyboard is a little trickier to take out. I mean, there's like a set of screws. It's not the easiest thing to remove this keyboard, but I'm not too worried about that. And then the floppy drive, in order to get to the floppy drive, we actually need to unscrew there's this plastic little enclosure that also contains the joystick. So we need to remove this guy. And the way to remove this guy is actually done by removing 1, 2, 3 screws. Actually, I don't think this one is, like, definitely like these 2 screws need to come out. And then there are 4 screws, 1, 2, 3, 4, that need to come out on the bottom. And once we do that, we should be able to just kind of lift this guy out. So let's start by doing that. So it turned out that I did need to unscrew all 3 of the smaller screws plus the 4 larger ones on the bottom. So having done so, this guy just lifts out, and very carefully I'm just gonna place it over here so I can kind of show you a little bit what's involved. And it's really simple. I mean, you basically have like these 2 cables, the ribbon cable for the data, and then this guy is the power. These guys will just like unplug and then plug them into the new USB floppy drive. And then we have like 4 screws on the side at the bottom there that are holding in this metal chassis in place, and then another set of 4 screws that are holding the drive attached to the metal bracket. And don't forget that there's like a little ground here that's plugged into the bracket as well. I don't think it's necessary for me to remove the entire bracket here, so I just removed 4 screws that were attaching the floppy drive to the bracket, and I can just kind of slide it out. However, before I slide it out, I just wanted to point something out. So the way that this drive was plugged in is through here, and of course you have like the power cable that was going over there, okay? One of the things that I want to point out is that like this ribbon cable has 1 red stripe, red cable on this end. And what that means is that it needs to go into the same pin position, to the same pins as this guy. And I don't know how well this is going to come through, but basically if you look very carefully on the circuit board, what we have here is 1 and 2 on these 2 pins, and then on the other side we have like 33 and 34 that you can barely read, but it's on there. So what that means is that the red stripe goes on the end where pins 33 and 34 are, while the stripe or the side that's unmarked goes on pin 1 and 2 on that side. So that's how it goes. So we just need to make sure that the new floppy emulator that we're going to put in is basically attached the same way. As I said, like here's the adapter. Now this is upside down, so it's really going to go here, but I'm just going to show it to you so you can kind of see this pin numbering, which should indeed match the same way. So here we have pins 1 and 2. On this side, I guess it just says 2. And then on the other side, it says pin 34 and then 33 right below it. So what that means is that if we flip it like so, then we should have pins 33 and 34 on this side and pins 1 and 2 on that side, which should indeed match because we want the red stripe to be towards pins 33 and 34. The power supply cable, it really only goes one way because it's kind of notched, and you can't really screw it up too much unless you force it, in which case you probably shouldn't be doing this type of work in the first place. Before screwing everything back in and tightening everything down, I just wanted to kind of run a quick test just to make sure that everything was working, and it is. So this is what the little floppy drive emulator looks like. This knob allows you to kind of scroll through all sorts of different disk images. I don't know how many are on here right now. And then and then as far as the DSS-1 is concerned, that's the floppy that's loaded in there. And then you can just kind of go to the system, say you want to load the bank, press enter, press yes, and then it's just kind of gonna load up the sound in here. So as I said, it works much, much better than a regular floppy disk, in my opinion. It's much more practical. You can have literally hundreds, if not thousands, of sounds loaded on a single thumb drive. Loading is complete, and now we have all of our sounds. I don't know if you can hear it. I have my headphones plugged in here. Anyway, probably can't hear anything. Cool. So this is working. Everything's hooked up correctly. It's talking to each other. I can screw everything back in and call this part of the project done. So step 2 would be to change the LCD display right here and put a brighter one in place. So if we open up the keyboard once more, there are these 2 circuit boards that we need to unscrew from the chassis. One is this guy right here, which is actually the LCD display itself. And then this guy right here, the KLM1013, is responsible basically to feeding power and additional information to the LCD display. So both of these guys need to come out. As always, take photos so that you can kind of refer back and make sure that you're not accidentally putting stuff back into the wrong spot. I unscrewed the LCD display and the little circuit board that comes along with it from the chassis. Some of the screws were on really, really tight. So if your board has equally tightly screwed screws, just be careful when you remove them so that you don't accidentally end up stripping something. The other thing we want to do is make a note or take a photograph of where these 2 cables plug in on this little circuit board, because unfortunately both connectors are the same type of connector. So when you put everything back together, it's easy to get these 2 swapped out, and you don't want to do that. So just take a photo so you know what goes where. The only other thing that I had to do is, you'll see there's a bunch of wires that are coming out of the LCD display, and they were all Ziploc tied together to some of these other wires. So I had to very, very carefully snip off the little Ziploc ties and free them. Be careful when you do that, because these wires are so tiny, and it's really, really easy to accidentally cut one of those guys off. So just take your time. So with that said, this guy just kind of plugs in here. We can unplug this thing and take everything out of the inside of the keyboard so we can work on it. This is what I'm going to be using as a replacement. This came from this company, Tida, and it's a 20 characters by 2 lines display, and I think it was pretty cheap. It was I don't know, around $10 or something like that. If you're curious and you want to order the same exact one, here is the actual item number, A1749, as I said, from tie.electronics.com. I'm not affiliated with them. I have nothing to do with them. I'm just a customer. But this is what I'm using if you want to use the same exact one. Now, if we take a close look between the 2 displays, you'll see that they are pretty damn similar, but there are some subtle differences that we need to pay attention to. So one of the main differences is that we're going to need to transfer all of these wires, desolder them from this guy, and solder them onto this. And if you look very, very closely, you can probably count that there are 14 wires going to the old display, while on the new display, there are actually 16 holes here. So what goes where? Well, because there are 16 holes, the last two holes, 15 and 16, you can pretty much ignore. But we do have to put these wires into the matching holes on this display. So if we flip them around, I'll show you a little bit what we're going to be looking at. Hopefully you can see this because they're teeny tiny. But I mean, if you look very, very carefully, on this side, there's like a 1, which indicates that this is pin 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like that. And then on the other side is pin 14, which is the last one. So this kind of tells you the order. And if you look on the new LCD display, it actually has the same type of indication, 1 and 2. And it ends, of course, with like 15 and 16 over here, which we're going to ignore. So we just need to basically remove one by one these little wires and resolder them onto here in the same order. So I finished rewiring all of the data cables to the appropriate slots, and as I said, there are 2 extra pins here that you can just ignore. So now I have 2 more wires. These are for like the power. They're coming from this little circuit board that are going into the old LCD display. So I have to wire those to those 2 pins here. However, you have to be really careful because the yellow wire needs to go to the anode and the brown wire needs to go to the cathode of the new display. Now I'm looking on the data sheets from TIDA, and what the data sheet is telling me is that this top pin is the cathode and the bottom one is the anode. Okay, so that would mean the cathode is right here and the anode is right here. However, in practice, because I've done this on another unit, I have found that those two are actually the opposite. So really and truly, the bottom one is the anode and the top one is the cathode. So we have to reverse them or else this thing is not going to work. All right, so I soldered the wires in so that if you look at it from the back, the cathode is at the top, the brown wire, and the yellow wire, the anode, is at the bottom. But of course, if we look at it from the front, then it would be exactly the opposite with like the anode, the yellow wire on top, and the brown wire, the cathode, at the bottom. With that out of the way, we can focus on the KLM 1013, which is a small little PCB board that is responsible to feeding power to the small little screen. And what we need to do is we need to remove a couple components from here, particularly this little transformer. And we also need to remove the small little transistor labeled Q1 here, as well as a resistor R3, which is at the top right side of the PCB. And then we need to like kind of make some connections. So I'll show you as we go along. Let's get started. All right, so here we are. I removed these 3 components that match the transistor Q1, the little transformer TR1, and then the resistor at R3. Now, with these 3 components removed, we need to turn our attention to the back. And I'm going to need to wire a small little wire between the lower pin of VR1 all the way to the middle pin of Q1, the transistor that we removed. All right, so what I've done here is wire this little jumper cable that's going to connect to this middle hole right here, whatever's coming out of this, okay? But I don't want to wire it quite yet because I need to insert a resistor. I need to like put a resistor between this middle hole right here and this hole right here. Now the value of this resistor is going to be determined by how much voltage this new LCD backlight is asking for. Because what you have to remember is that this guy is outputting now, since we removed this little transformer, this guy is outputting 5 volts of power that it's getting. And this is too much for this guy. So we need to limit it with a little resistor. Now, I'm looking at the data sheet, and this guy is asking for 3.1 volts at 20 milliamps, okay? So remember that, 3.1 volts at 20 milliamps, although your LCD panel, if you're using a different brand, might differ from those values. So we need to do like some really, really simple math. So first of all, we take like 5 volts, which is what this guy's outputting, and subtract 3.1 volts, and that gives us 1.9 volts. That's what we have to actually kind of like remove as far as like the power that's coming out of here, going into here, okay? So 1.9 volts is what we want to subtract from the 5 volts that this guy is normally outputting. Now, the other thing that we need to keep in mind is this 20 milliamps is what this guy wants to see. So we need to do like some very, very simple math, and we're going to be using Ohm's law to do that. And basically, the value of the resistance is going to be like the voltage divided by the impedance, or the amperage that this guy's asking for. So really, really simple is, we said 1.9 volts is what we need to subtract. So 1.9 divided by, and we don't want to do like 20 milliamps, we want to convert it to amps, okay? So basically 20 milliamps converted to amps is 0.02. So what we want to do is 1.9 divided by 0.02, and that gives us 95, which is close enough to, I have like some 100 ohm resistors here, and this is going to be close enough. It's going to cut down like the voltage just a hair more, but we're still going to be very much in range. So now I know that I'm going to put like an 100 ohm resistor, and I'm going to wire it from this middle hole right here to this hole right here, okay? Now, as I said, you want to check the data sheet if you're using like a different brand of LCD display, because it might have slightly different values. It might require slightly different power. So, you just want to alter whatever value of the resistors that you're going to put on this board, you want it to match so that your backlight is getting enough amperage and voltage. All right, so what I did is, as I said, I wired this little 100 ohm resistor between the middle pin where the little transistor used to be and this bottom hole right here. So now the only thing that I have left to do is just simply solder one end of this, okay, I guess this side, solder one end of this jumper cable that's going from the bottom pin of the VR1 to this middle pin where like the resistor is, and then I will be done with this modification. So everything is back on. I'm gonna recap what we did. So basically, we removed all of the wires that were on the old LCD display. There were like 14 wires, and basically transfer them to the new LCD display using the same pin numbers as these guy, except leaving 2 extra ones empty because we don't really need them. Then the next thing that we did is we put the yellow wire coming from this guy and soldered them onto what's supposed to be like the anode connection, and then the brown wire goes to the cathode connection. So that should be correct now. Lastly, what we did is we removed a handful of components here. So we took out this guy that used to be on here. So that goes out. There was this little transistor that used to be right there. Sorry about the focus. So this guy was taken out. And then there was another little resistor that used to be on R3 here, and this guy was taken out as well. Okay, so remove TR1, Q1, and R3. Gone. Then what we did is we wired from the third pin, sorry, it's in the shadow, you can't really see. We put like a little jumper on here. Focus, thank you. And this jumper would go from like the bottom leg of VR1 all the way to the middle hole right here. And last but not least, we had to put a little resistor going from like the middle hole to this bottom hole of TR1. And the value of this resistor that I'm using is 100 ohms, so that my LCD display is getting the proper voltage for the backlight. All right, so it's time for the moment of truth. Before I put everything back together, I want to make sure that this is going to work. So what I did is I hooked up the LCD display back on this circuit board right here in this little slot. And then I brought these wires that are carrying power, 5 volts power, going into this small little circuit board. So everything is hooked back up. And now it's the moment of truth. We need to keep our fingers crossed to see if this new display is going to work with this wiring. So here goes nothing. Ha! Look at that. It works. This is fantastic. This is exactly what I wanted to see. I mean, wow, this is great. I'm very, very happy. I think this is a much, much bigger improvement over the old LCD display that's honestly I could barely read. At the same time, it's not overly bright and it's not obnoxious. I think this is like a really, really great match and really great quality of life improvement. It didn't really cost hardly anything. I mean, geez, it was, as I said, like about like $10 for the display, and then, you know, just a little bit of time to make some small adjustments and rewire everything. So I'm very happy with this. So number 2 is done. I just need to put it back into the chassis, and then we can move on to the third thing that I wanted to fix with this keyboard. Okay, so before I put the new LCD back in the case, I wanted to point something out. So if you look at the profile of the old LCD and you compare it with the new LCD, you'll notice that the new one is a little deeper. Okay, so some people opt to put like some spacers in here. I don't think it's necessary. I think you just kind of basically screw it in and just kind of, you know, like let the screws kind of hold it in place. I think you'll be fine. So I'm not really going to worry about spacers right now, but I mean, if you want, you can add a couple of spacers just to kind of make this little stub, like, you know, a little bit like deeper, to account for the fact that this guy is a little thicker than the old one. All right, and we are back in business. So the new LCD display has been installed. As I said, if you want to use spacers, go ahead and use spacers. Otherwise, just, you know, just don't over tighten things up, and I think you'll be fine even without the spacers. So we have the new LCD display. I think it's a big improvement overall to the look. I even like the fact that the blue kind of matches the DSS-1 blue right here. We have the Gotek USB floppy emulator here. So this is all in really great shape, and I'm very, very happy so far. And honestly, it really hasn't been very complicated to make these 2 improvements. So the only thing that I have left to do is take a look at the keyboard, and I'm probably gonna have to remove it just so I can kind of clean out the contacts underneath and make sure that every single key is playing on the keyboard properly. And then I would say that this guy is basically 100% good to go. All right, so the DSS-1 keyboard is out. Removing it wasn't too complicated. I mean, basically, here, let me show you. So you have to remove 1, 2, 3 screws, and those are accessed from underneath the unit. And then there's 3 more screws, 1, 2, and 3, that need to be removed, unscrewed from the top. Beyond that, you just have to be careful. There's a handful of wire bundles that need to be unplugged. One is this guy right here, which corresponds, here, let me show you, to the aftertouch that guy plugs in here. And then there's like these three bundles of wires right here that normally would plug into these three slots right here on this processor board. You might have to like snip off some Ziploc ties and just kind of carefully just kind of wind the bundles of wires around the circuit boards. But generally speaking, this isn't terribly complicated stuff. So now that we have the keyboard out, I mean, what I have to do is probably what's become my least favorite part of all of this, which is to carefully remove each and every one of those keys, and so that I can kind of clean the sensors underneath. And then while I'm at it, while I have all the keys removed, I might as well just go ahead and buff them and clean them individually, since I think it does make a good difference to the feel of the keyboard. It's a pain in the butt for sure, but I think it's worth it. All right, so here's the Korg DSS-1 disassembled in pieces parts. I have all the individual keys in these two boxes. These guys are ready to get polished tomorrow, and then they can go back in. The other thing is I kind of like thoroughly cleaned and vacuumed up any loose debris and stuff like that. I also sprayed all the contacts with some contact cleaners and a little bit of alcohol, so hopefully that does the trick. Originally I was thinking about like maybe going in with like a little bit of sandpaper and carefully scraping all the surfaces, but then I decided not to do that. First of all, because it's really easy to kind of bend these guys backwards and then create more problems than it's worth. And secondly, because the majority of the keys are actually working fine. I only had issues with 2 or 3 of them. So what I'm gonna do is, when everything is nice and clean and ready and polished, I'm just gonna put everything back together and hook up the cables, but not screw the keyboard back in. And then I can kind of go in and test the keys. And then if there's some keys that are still not working, I'll just focus on those and not necessarily on every single one of them, because I don't think it's necessary. Beyond that, everything looks pretty good. I normally replace the felt. This is like the aftertouch strip right here. And this is kind of a little bit tricky to just get this felt out. In addition to that, it doesn't look too bad. So I think I'm going to leave the top felt alone. I think this is fine. Rather on the back side, on the bottom felt, because I noticed that, like, especially when I released the keys, they felt a little clickety-clackety. So I think I'm just going to put another layer of felt up here. I have like these little strips of felt. I mean, this you can find like on any craft store. I mean, this is what I got. And I'm just going to go through and glue them on top with a little bit of Elmer's glue. That's all it takes. And I think it's gonna help to kind of cushion the keys when they come back up and not make them quite so clickety-clackety. All right, so this is what I've done. I have removed this little contact assembly from the keyboard and hooked it back up to the Korg DSS-1. I turned it on. I loaded up a sound in here and hooked up a pair of headphones. And honestly, like, the best way that I know how to diagnose and make sure that all the contacts are working is to go one by one and gently press them with a pair of tweezers. And just kind of go right down the line and see if everything's working. If something is not working, I'll tend to put like a little mark on it, and then I'll disconnect it and go in there. I'll try first with a little bit of alcohol and a Q-tip to kind of sort of get myself in there and try to clean up any potential residue that might be preventing the contact from working. And otherwise, what you can do is, still with a pair of tweezers, just kind of very gently get in there and maybe like kind of try to lift up the little metal strip and kind of bend it very, very gently to see if maybe you can help it make it a little bit better contact. I mean, quite honestly, I really dislike this particular design. It's used on the Korg DSS-1 and it's used on the Korg DW8000. I find it to be unnecessarily complicated. I mean, I'm sure there's like pros and cons to this versus the little rubber contacts that a lot of other manufacturers used in the era. But I don't know. For me, this is like a real pain in the butt to try to figure out, and it's really, really easy to kind of screw things up if you accidentally bend some of these little metal tongues the wrong way, or you know, or whatever. Anyway, but this is how I know how to do it, and that's what I'm gonna do. And I'm just gonna go through and test every single key and make sure that everything is making the right contact. And then I'm gonna hook it back up to the keyboard and run a similar test before I actually screw everything back in. All right, so everything's working, but geez, what a pain in the ass that was, for real. So basically, when I had the little contact board that I just showed you disconnected from the keyboard, everything was working, all the contacts were working. But then when I screwed it back in and did a test with the full keyboard, then tons of the keys weren't working. And what I ended up having to do is literally go in with, let me see if I can do this with one hand. I mean, I had to like kind of lift the keyboard, go underneath, and then with a pair of tweezers, just very, very carefully adjust manually each and every one of these little metal tongues until the key was just right and the velocity seemed proper. I mean, it took forever. I mean, as I said, everything works. So I'm happy with it. The keyboard is ready to get back into the DSS-1, but this was really, really difficult. And basically, I don't know, I just wouldn't recommend it unless it's absolutely necessary. In my case, I had like a couple of dead keys and there were a couple of like stuck notes, so I had to do something about it. But if your keyboard is working fine, leave it alone, because trust me, this is not something that's easy to deal with. All right, so the keyboard is back in the Korg DSS-1. All the keys appear to be working. I'm not touching this thing anymore. It was such a pain in the butt. There's one last thing that I want to do, however, and that is this little joystick. It's a little loose and wobbly, and it's actually kind of like slightly bent. I don't know if you can tell, so it's not quite centered. So I want to take it out and see if I can get it to be a little bit tighter, a little bit more straight, and then that will be absolutely the last thing that I do on this Korg DSS-1. All right, so here's the little control joystick disassembled, and as I suspected, one of the things that tends to happen with these guys is this little metal clips that the potentiometers locks into the plastic case tends to get a little bit loose, if you can kind of tell. And this is like an easy fix. You just go in with like a flathead screwdriver or a small pair of pliers and just kind of press them back in. And that's all it takes to make the joystick feel nice and tight again. While I'm at it, I'm also going to spray some contact cleaner in this little potentiometer, as I'm going to re-grease everything so it feels nice and smooth. And then as the main joystick is concerned, I don't know if you can kind of tell, but there's a very, very slight bend on the very tip, so I'm just gonna carefully try to straighten it out, and hopefully I don't end up snapping it off, because that would be bad. All right, as I said, this was pretty straightforward. I mean, what I did is those little tabs, I just kind of like tightened them so that they're holding the little potentiometers nice and tight against the plastic case. Then I cleaned everything out. I put like some more grease. I did put like some contact cleaner inside the potentiometers just to make sure. And of course, you know, while you're at it, just kind of double check and make sure that there's no problems with the wiring or anything like that. But no, I think this guy is ready to get right back into the DSS-1. Here it is, the Korg DSS-1. I mean, it's finished, everything's working. In all fairness, everything was working before. So more than a repair video, this was a maintenance / upgrade video. And what we did is replace the display right here. This guy is much brighter and much easier to read, so this is going to be really nice. We also added one of those Gotek USB emulator, Floppy emulator drives, and this is going to be really, really cool because I can keep my entire collection on a single thumb drive. We cleaned out the joystick, we cleaned out the entire keyboard, made sure that all the keys are working. We replaced all of the switches underneath the buttons, so now everything feels nice and responsive. And you know, and overall I just kind of like double checked and triple checked just to make sure that everything was working fine, and it is. This is a fantastic unit. It's in great shape, and I'm very, very excited to have it fully working. And in my opinion, the Korg DSS-1 is one of the nicest synth / samplers that Korg has ever released, and I can't wait for you guys to hear it, and I'm gonna let you know what it sounds like in the jam video that's coming up next. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next repair video on K's Labs.